Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto, Willies, your host. We continue to be honored with Patrick Lovell, who is the producer of The Con, where he discussed the fraudulent mortgage racketeering that took down the economy in 2008. Today we continue the series, how the billionaire class got away with their power accumulation over the last 14 years. Look, Lovell calls himself the $71 trillion truth teller, which he is if you followed the last four series. Today, we are going to wrap it up. He's going to break it down with a short synopsis of what we've covered. We are going to bring Roseanne Raviola Meal to Mealy. I hope I said that right, who will bring us the average person's perspective and what it means to her and what she can do. And then we'll wrap it up with Patrick letting us know exactly what we as Americans can do to solve this problem once and for all. Because, folks, it is still in our hands. Patrick, it's been my pleasure to be with you, my dear brother. Break down in a summary what our 5 episodes have been about.
Well, I want to start with saying the honor is all ours, mine and Roseanne Raviola Mile. We're so grateful for your listening and channeling and understanding in your pursuit of answers that are important to this conundrum that we all find ourselves in. So over the course of this series that you and I have been able to dialogue at length about is this monumental revelation. It's almost impossible to convey the ridiculousness that here are 3 citizens having conversations that encompass the landscape of quite literally the last several decades, but in a manner that has eluded every platform, every pathway, every microphone with a large audience, starting with mainstream media, that has failed miserably to reveal what are, quite frankly, simple truths. Now, one of the shortcuts that Roseanne and I formulated many years ago, in fact, I have to give her, I think, the credit, because she had responded to one of the items that I had revealed to her when we were doing our podcast known as The New Untouchables, which we were forced to do because I produced a television series called The Con that everybody can find at thecon.tv, which is the blueprint for the greatest criminal conspiracy in the history of the world, financial criminal conspiracy, but that never ended. And we got quashed by the system of media and money and control that has prevented the public of the United States from being educated to what we have become because of the nature of what you had said posthumously as shenanigans that you constructed brilliantly in your introduction to me as racketeering. Because we discovered it's not rocket science, Egberto. It's racketeering. And I think a lot of people go, well, okay, yeah, it's racketeering, but who are you? What are you? Why am I listening to you? What do you know that everybody else that has millions of followers, that have platforms and billions of dollars of resources aren't telling me? Why would I listen to you? Well, I guess it's a miracle that we were able to accomplish what we did. But because I am a producer and I've been in the business for a long time and I'm an inquisitive guy and I know how to ask questions because I'm a 56-year-old man who's been a professional for a long time and I've been in the world that we live in and I've been able to understand both inside the machine and outside looking in. I had the basic ingredients to understand that if something doesn't make sense, you have to understand the questions to ask to be able to understand how this whole thing jives. And so when you bridge, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. We come back to that simple phrase that absolute power corrupts absolutely. The irony of this thing, and again, while our audiences and millions of people that will eventually hear this, and they're going to just have to reach in deep inside their minds, and they're going to have to turn on their CPU brain, their central processing unit, to understand what David Byrne, because I'm from the 80s and he was a great singer from the Talking Heads, taught us long ago, same as it ever was. Look, corruption has been a part of the human story and society for over a millennium. Everything in history can be tied to the story of corruption because absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what have we done in the year 2024, guys? In the aftermath of the wake of the election, which was supposed to be turn the page, i.e. move forward, i.e. change we can believe in, which are all basically platitudes, because I'm an optimistic person and I do believe that you want to get to the promised land in order to form a more perfect union, as obviously Barack Obama so eloquently championed, but unfortunately who went backwards because he put all of the people in power that created this racketeering scheme that has never ended, and they have complete control. And
with all these things that we've said so far, Patrick, I want folks to know centrally, what are we speaking about? What is this racketeering? And then continue, please.
It's simple. Corruption. When you understand the methodology of money and the creation of money and the flow of money and the composite flow of indexes and all of the things that are associated with financialization, the simplistic part is follow the money. So on that note, what I want to do is I want you to consider here that after everything that we have been able to lay out within the 4 parts that preceded this, and then what we're going to conclude with today, is we've established that in the 2008, in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, which was in 2008, that was the largest racketeering scheme in the history of the world. It took a $4.5 trillion housing bubble, which was our housing market, and it created an $800 trillion global derivatives calamity that blew up the global economy. Humpty Dumpty. But the way we put Humpty Dumpty back together again was when no one understood what was going on. We were all sold a bill of goods based on smoke and mirrors. Why? Because the United States, or the people of the United States, have not been educated to how our financial system works. If you go through college and you get a BA in, let's say, anything related to political science, for example, you're taught that we have 3 separate branches but equal branches of government. And you're also taught that Congress has the power of the purse. Once you get a little bit more sophisticated, you understand that we have a sovereign currency, that we can actually budget whatever the needs of the country need to be met, whether it's in a disaster or a war. And that's because of centuries, quite frankly, of evolution that put us in a position as a global superpower that leads to the dollar being a global, the global currency. But I want to hit the rewind real quick, and then I'm going to leave it up to you to drive with Roseanne. Things have to work. Just like you're an engineer, just like you understand that for a boat to float, for a plane to fly, for a building to stand, there are a lot of things that have to happen within that composite to make that reality happen. And so in the case of the economy, in the case of money, in the case of so-called free markets, as it's juxtaposed with so-called democracy, which means that the rule is supreme, the rule of law is supreme, you have to be able to understand, well, wait a second, if the rule of law is not supreme and billionaires are above the law and above market forces, why might that be the case when I am struggling to pay for my monthly bills, whether it's to go to the grocery store and to afford all of the food that apparently was central to the election in terms of what people were voting for, versus the world that I'm seeing out in front of me, the billionaires that seem to have absolute power. And so what we're revealing to you is that, just like David Byrne said, and same as it ever was that absolute power corrupts absolutely, because in 2008, we created a smash and grab situation, which was the end of this cycle where the middle class of the United States had grown perpetually and to a point of no return because supply didn't equal demand, because there was too much debt based on too much value while we farmed out the golden goose, which enabled the whole thing to implode, which in capitalism would have led to the destruction of everything, to where we would have to literally rebuild from the ground up to do what they had to do after the Great Depression. Instead, we gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the billionaire apparatus and the billionaire class, who used that opportunity to completely hijack the United States, to control it not of, by, and for the people, but of, by, and for the billionaire class.
Very important. And I want to put a few things in simple terms. Notice Patrick spoke about 1, racketeering, 2, mortgages, and 3, derivatives. Those are complex things when you think about it, but I want to put it in very simple terms. Many people were encouraged to buy more homes than they could afford. And to mitigate that, people created things known as derivatives and other financial instruments to make it seem like what they were doing was okay. When you could no longer afford your mortgages and you had to foreclose, guess what? They should have taken that loss for their misdeeds. They didn't. The government bailed them out with the $71 trillion, whatever $71 trillion person is. They created money to bail these guys out. You were left holding the bag, and those who encouraged the destruction of your financial lives made even more profits. Again, that is not complete, but in effect, that is as a result of what we heard Patrick speak about. Now, Rose, one of the reasons I wanted to have you in as well is you call yourself, as we've spoken, the everyday American neighborhood woman. Okay, so you are the average everyday person. What does this mean to you? What, after you've listened to the 4 hours of what we've discussed, after you've been a part of doing much of what you do here, what does this mean to you?
First of all, thank you so much for letting me come on with Patrick. You started off by talking about you went to go look at the different interviews. Why didn't the media? Why aren't we on Netflix? Okay. The conversations that you and Patrick have had, and I've listened to them, and I've listened to every single Truth Bomb, over 500 of them, and I've watched the con, and I've watched the new Untouchables. That's only 19 episodes, but I did all the transcripts, okay? So first, the three of us are very different from what your average person is like, okay? And I'm going to start with this. Years ago, in the 70s, I'm in a meeting with all these precinct captains from the Democratic Party, red-faced, cigar-chomping precinct captain. And he's saying to this overflow crowd of precinct captains and what you would today call the blue no matter who crowd. But we didn't have that. We didn't say that. It was just, you voted for the Democrats. That was it. So he's up there and he goes, you know what? People care about 2 things. They care about garbage and they care about dog poop. That's what people complain about the most. And I even saw that when I was the public information officer for the small town of Boulder City where I live, 14,000 people. What would I get the most calls about? If there was dog poop all over, how come those people don't pick up after their dogs? And if the garbage wasn't picked up. So 4 episodes, magnificent episodes with 2 people who care. And I'm always going to go back to the caring. You care enough to open your mind to listen to each other. That's one thing. Both of you also have, which is it's necessary. You have a context where the 2 of you can speak to each other, not just pulling stuff out of your ear. You have the education. And I don't mean you got to go to school for 27 years. That's not what I mean. You have to be grounded. So, in the introduction, when Patrick was talking in the introduction and the 4 episodes that you guys did, what do I say? Roseanne says, cut off their money. Oh, cut off their money? Roseanne says, because she's listened to Tom Murphy, who lives in Ohio, who was the law enforcement officer. And I didn't like those law enforcement officers in the 60s. What did we call them? We called them pigs, did we not? Yes. Okay. Tom, when he was working undercover to find out why all these homes were being foreclosed upon in Summit County, Ohio. This is episode 1. Patrick, by sheer chance, coincidence, talking, right, finds the sheriff. He said, talk to this guy. Talk to this guy. Tom doesn't know about finances. Tom doesn't know a derivative from a cup of coffee, okay? But what does Tom know? Tom knows theft. So I've just said a couple of words. Cut off their money. It's theft. People care about garbage and dog poop. My kids that I taught my kids I was a teacher of history at a Catholic school. My juniors didn't want to listen to me talking about history. Forget that stuff. But they had to listen to me because if I failed them, they had to go to summer school. My father showed me we got to do the right thing. We got to help people. You don't go stealing. You know, as I say that word, I don't know if you remember Lloyd Blankfein. I see his face. This lying dog stands there, sits there in front of the Congress, in front of elected officials, and he lies. Oh, we don't, our guys who are selling to our customers, they don't know what Goldman's position is on this particular item. What is he, out of his mind? Why do you go to an investment house? Look, I don't know all kinds of ins and outs about investments, but I know my neighbor, Sammy, who was a broker. Sammy says, it's all gambling. I knew how to bet on horses and I knew how to bet on football games. Okay, what's the stock market? Anybody who wants to go bet on Bitcoin, you go right ahead. You go right ahead. It's only another commodity, my friend. What do you buy Bitcoin with? You gotta buy Bitcoin with dollars. The trick of any currency is to get billions of people to accept it. You know anybody who ain't gonna accept a buck? They ain't gonna accept Bitcoin. They want to accept Bitcoin. Go ahead. Here, I got 10 pounds of rice to give you. Okay? Come on. Don't give me BS. Okay? That's all. Patrick, the big difference between the two of us, he grew up believing in an American dream. I grew up, I didn't even window shop because I knew I couldn't buy it.
And I want to stop you right at that sentence. That's a perfect place to get Patrick in. Patrick always believed in the American dream. You hadn't even looked in the glass for the American dream. And what I think a lot of what we're doing here is to tell America, and I think Patrick has done a great job. There is an American dream that we can aspire to, but we have to do the work and not allow those who have done what they've done to do what they continue to do. So what I'm going to ask Patrick to do at this point is, Patrick, you were able to define all the problems. We had Rose, who in her expansive, passionate way, points out a lot of what the average American folk is feeling. But here's what we need. A lot of people don't know where to go, Patrick. A lot of people listen to this, and because it sounds so complex, they throw their hands up in the air and they go turn on TV. It's called bread and circus. They're fed, entertained, but they don't look forward to anything. You listen to what Rose just said. She never window shopped. She never had to do that because you, Patrick, are the one with the American dream. She really didn't sit down waiting for the American dream. Now, how do we get to the American dreams? How do we solve the problems to get to the American dreams, Patrick?
First of all, I love that, Egberto, because the entire purpose of what we're doing at the Clean New Deal at thecleannewdeal.org is to redeem the dream. This is a civil rights-like movement to basically pick up the torch of what previous generations of Americans had bestowed upon us to take us to the next level, to create the greatest renaissance in the history of the world, which is an incredible possibility. All things are possible. We know that. I've established that in terms of my ideology growing up in your city, Houston, Texas, the home of NASA. We have established and proved time and time again that anything is possible. But like Abraham Lincoln said, the better angels of our nature have to prevail. And I want to compliment my colleague, Roseanne. What a beautiful introduction, Roseanne, because what you had talked about, Egberto, in terms of bread and circuses, what Roseanne did is what she states every single day. She provides facts and food. She provides sustenance, and she's got standards, and that's what we have to have, are standards and character and credibility if we're going to overwhelm the madness of lies and deception that has befuddled what was the greatest upwardly mobile generation, middle class in history that was bestowed upon us by great sacrifice. So where do we go from here is the question, right? Because let's take, for example, just a page out of the Harris-Walz, at least promulgation of what the campaign was all about. Turn the page, right? Turn the page, move forward. Let's get to the next step because anything is possible, except you can't get to a solution unless you understand the problem and identify the problem. What is the problem that we're talking about? We're talking about what everybody is talking about, except we're providing the facts and food, the sustenance of what this is all about. And we want people to indulge. We want them to feast on the truth. So, for example, I'll give you a little bit of an antidote here in terms of the universal construct, which is just kind of a fun little interlude in terms of how I think, right? Look, I don't know what your religious persuasion is. I don't know what your identity is. I don't know where you're coming from, other than this is the nature of the universe. And this is what we know. This is cosmological fact. This is physics. This is what it's all about. So before there was light, there was darkness, and there was light that overcame the darkness. And when you have the truth, you live in light. And when you live a lie, you are depraved. When you have the truth, you are bulletproof. When you lie inside, you die. So stop lying, stop buying lies, and become a nuclear reaction vector to what we're revealing to you to get us to the next step, to become a nuclear force to overcome the darkness with the light. That's what we're talking about here, because all we're looking at, and it's everybody played this game as a youngster. There's a game called Hide the Flag or Capture the Flag. And one of the basically strategies of the game is to deceive, to get people to look the other way and every which way to Sunday so that they can't find the flag. Another composite game that everybody understands is the 3-card Monty. Can you follow where, what's underneath the cup? It's just simply deception. How fast can your mind work? Do you understand the system? But what we all have to understand, and this is the most important part about the American dream, i.e., to redeem the dream. The American dream isn't about the aggregation of massive wealth at other people's expense. That's not the dream, to become a billionaire while tens of thousands of people are basically living as your surrogate to basically provide for your fiefdom. That would be called tyranny. The American dream is about the law, where all men, women, creed, whatever the case is, are equal under the law. But what we discovered, and why I had to reconfigure my entire mindset, Egberto, because yes, I come from an upper middle class family. I come from an educated family. I come from a family where my father was a senior executive, a large multinational corporation in the fossil fuel industry. So I grew up, I guess, with privilege based on what I discovered downstream was really not in the best interest of humanity, i.e. global warming, dependence on fossil fuel. I had to go through a process my entire life to understand what? Climate, understand economy, understand society, understand processes and all sorts of different things to arrive at a case that in the end, it's all energy. It doesn't matter where the energy comes from, but we need energy, right? And so again, to foster this sort of endeavor that we need to do to move it forward, you have to become a nuclear reaction vector because that is energy. That's what propels light forward. And so not to get too obtuse or abstract or whatever the case is or philosophical, the bottom line is that the United States was born in a revolution against tyranny to create separation of powers, to create the supremacy of law predicated on the Bill of Rights. Those are what our tradition is. And when you look at the entire history, and of course, Martin Luther King said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Justice is the American dream because in the vacuum of justice is tyranny. And so, again, what are we talking about over and over? And I'm going to turn this over to Roseanne. What we have revealed to you through these 4 episodes, now 5, what we revealed to you in the con, which are 5 episodes at thecon.tv, which lead you to the cleannewdeal.org. Now, a lot of people out there on our side of the ideological spectrum, Egberto, have been clamoring for a new deal for a long time. But what is the New Deal? The New Deal is a government of, by, and for the people. That's what it is. And ultimately, we could talk about the different terms of, isms in an economic structure. But like we also discussed, we have to have a hybrid system because that's just the way it is. You have to have some forms of free market, some forms of socialism, but you have to have balance and dynamism that can only manifest from the rule of law, which means that no man or company is above the rule of law. So when Roseanne goes through this whole orchestration of what you would refer to as bread and circuses, which she arrives at facts and food, you got to understand that you don't get the ticket. You don't sell your soul for the ticket to the circus while all you care about is dog shit while Tony is, playing somebody behind the scene with an accordion, right? I mean, we've all seen Goodfellas a million times. We all understand organized crime. When our government becomes organized crime, like FDR said, he said a government ruled by, the oligarch money class is ruled by organized crime. Okay, so again, hit the rewind button. What is the United States predicated for the American dream? It has to have the law to be able to get facts, which they're created, aggregated through discovery, which you have techniques to be able to understand who did what, when, and how to create an outcome. Go ahead.
So what you've done is you've actually presented the crime, you presented, and you've also shown that the people who committed the crime, meaning those guys who blew up our economy, not just in 2008, but also partially what was done in 2000 during the COVID crisis and during the supply, all the people that are responsible for that pretty much went scotch-free.
And they got trillions of dollars.
And they got trillions of our dollars. They created money to give these guys that we ultimately pay for. Now, the solution to that problem, as you said, is to make sure that government is declared or that we have a government elected as our Constitution states, of and by the people. What do you suggest? How do we get there?
So, Roseanne, tell us what the 4 questions are.
There's a relationship between qualified immunity. You can't let those cops run around doing whatever they want to do because what do you have?
The question is, can the police actually get away with murder? Can they shoot somebody in the back and not be held accountable? That's called qualified immunity. On the books, they can. But in a democracy where the state can't be above the law, then police who shoot unarmed Black people, for example, or whomever else, they have to be held accountable to the law as well. The revelation is, why do we have qualified immunity? That's the question. Why should the police be above the law? And that's not all. Go ahead.
Then we have presidential immunity. What is that saying? What is that saying? Oh, when he's the president, he can do anything he wants.
So the Supreme Court had the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that, of course, says that no officer of the United States who participates in an insurrection can run for the office of the United States, let alone the presidency of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States etch-a-sketch that out of existence to create presidential immunity, which means what? They betrayed not just the Civil War, they betrayed the actual American Revolution. That is ridiculous. So we've just identified the police are above the law and the president's above the law. Who else is above the law? The judges are above the law. What did the Supreme Court prove to us? What we're showing you is there's a perverse inverse scenario that operates in the shadows of the United States because we aren't what we seem, which is why I had to reconfigure my entire mind. Why? Because when I grew up, I believed the law was the law. I believed that you achieve things by hard work and you discipline and you put yourself into it. And so if you become a doctor, then you make $400,000 a year and you drive a Porsche, you earned it. Okay, great. No problem, no foul. But what happens when you find out that one, maybe, and I don't want to use a doctor in this case, but the guy who lives in the biggest house down the street, who might be a private equity investor, might be a hedge fund trader, might be involved with all sorts of criminal acts, might have the biggest house on the block. Does that pervert the notion of achievement? Of course it does. Just like what I'm explaining to you, just like we're explaining to you, this is a perverse inverse of power in democracy. You don't live in a democracy when you have presidential immunity, judicial immunity, and
qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity. So those are the power structures that basically create what is tyranny.
Patrick, I say well because I saw the crimes, murders go in front of the court, in front of the judge, and the kid who killed his girlfriend, his father was connected. Does the kid pay a price? No. Does he ever go to jail? No. Do the kids in my neighborhood take the black kids who happen to cross the tracks and come into Bridgeport, do they take them and throw them into garbage cans and set them on fire? Yes. So I see that, and I know the judges are corrupt, the attorneys are corrupt. You got enough money, and the priest says to me, he takes the mob guy's money, and I look at him and I say, Father, you take that money? He goes, yeah, the end justifies the means. That's it. Give me a break.
So in effect, what we're saying, and I think as Patrick explained, there is that, again, first of all, we know it's corruption, and there are many others. There are many factors that go into what makes things unequal, what make things, and continue with that, Patrick, because I want to expand on that. What I wanted to hear, though, is I wanted to hear those 4 items that we were speaking about.
Well, and this is the question I'll tee up for you, Roseanne, again, because you were right to talk about the Electoral College, but that was after we present, obviously, which you well know, what we are, which is these question marks of who has the power and why. So what do we question about the Electoral College?
The Electoral College, the states, like say Wyoming, has lots of billionaires, okay, and few people. And they have more power with the government than the whole state of California. And why does that happen? See, in Chicago, they put on the electors that are going to do exactly what the machine tells them to do. And why do they? We didn't know, and until I met you and went through all the study and the work, which I enjoyed, what in the world is Federal Reserve Act 13.3? That's where the money's coming from. Mr. Tim Geithner, the worst governor of the Federal Reserve in New York, called the American public foam on the runway. so that we, the peons, the
allow
puny,
them to land without fire. Now, I want to take this and sort of get ready to close her down with this respect, because with what you spoke about the Federal Reserve, and I'd like Patrick to expand on this because it's important. When we use terms like what the Federal Reserve is doing, etc., most Americans, it goes right over their heads.
right?
What won't go over their heads is to understand that we have a Federal Reserve System that is private and that it has a clause in there that defies the will of the people, meaning that gets around Congress. So I want to end sort of in this regards. We have a private Federal Reserve that can pretty much go haywire and do as they please. We have a government of and by the people. How do we ensure that those two things can cease to exist in that form and have it where it really is we the people, and we don't have a system that can maintain the corruption that we had in the 2008 crash, in the 29 crash, in the 2020, in the 2019 crash, and all these other things? How do we actually just close this all together? Patrick.
I'm going to offer you two things, and then I'm going to toss it to Roseanne to give us what we call the precepts of the Clean New Deal, which will identify, and then I hope I'll have a chance to close with what the next steps are. But let me just talk about Federal Reserve Act 13.3 first, to your question. Okay, so first and foremost, it is a misnomer to calibrate the purpose and the methodology of the Federal Reserve as completely independent functioning of the government of the United States. Now, we have established that there's 13 Federal Reserve governors, I believe, and then there's the affiliate banks, of course, around the country, and there's a reason it was designed that way so that we wouldn't have monopoly in the Northeast. We wanted to kind of create as much dynamism around the economy in the United States as we could, and that was a smart move. The Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the currency. We had basically thousands of currencies at the time that had, and this had been going on from the very beginning, the argument about a central bank and a central reserve currency, which goes back to Europe, right? Because the battle within the revolutionaries was, okay, we don't want to become what it was that we rebelled against to create the United States. But eventually, the stability of the currency and the centralization of the federal government became the thing that had to create continuity so that we could stabilize and grow. I mean, that was the choice of previous generations of Americans. By the time we created the Federal Reserve, which was created by independent banks, of course, it was J.P. Morgan Chase. It was all the guys, and everybody has heard about, whatever island, I can't remember the name of the island off of South Carolina where they all met, mysteriously in Jekyll Island. Everybody knows that book of Jekyll Island, who's ever paid attention to the Federal Reserve. But the long and the short of it is, the consideration and the concern at that time was for the financial system to usurp the power of the democracy. That was obviously the consideration. So eventually, as they developed the statutes and the laws to create this sort of stability within the economic system, they had to create a scenario because they knew in capitalism there was going to be booms and busts. That's just the nature of the business cycle, okay? But what they also constituted at that time, because the boom and bust cycle came out of the crisis of 1907, which basically mandated that you had to have a centralized currency. Otherwise, we would never be able to get out of the disaster that we were in, which was a massive depression at that time. What did it lead to? Well, it led to complete hysteria and bubble scenarios based and predicated on fraud that would ultimately lead to the Great Depression. And when the Great Depression blew up 25% of the population of the United States that were unemployed and living in Hoovervilles, and the suffering of starvation and no work and all of those other things, which would ultimately lead to Keynesian economics and the New Deal that would ultimately save capitalism from itself, what was happening behind the scenes was that the Federal Reserve created these statutes to create what were known as a hybrid between the private and the actual government sectors. And what they did was they created financing, because the United States had sovereign currency, that they could finance their way out of disasters. And you got to think that there's wars, there's natural disasters, there's reasons why you want the federal government to be able to help whatever region or the entire country as a whole to get out of a disaster situation, because otherwise you're not going to maintain a government, right? You're not going to maintain a structure that that we all depend on for so many different reasons.
Patrick,
right?
I mean, I want us to centralize though on 13 that fact, because I understand that, the government has some impact on the Federal Reserve, but ultimately, if you have an escape clause in anything, that gives you an escape clause out of everything. If you put a pinhole in a balloon, that balloon explodes or the air gets let out. So, in as much as our Federal Reserve, the government has some control over our Federal Reserve, ultimately speaking, the Federal Reserve can be independent using a particular clause.
Well, that too, but that's politics, and that's the deception of power. But you need to understand first, and what the audience needs to understand is that the statutes that came out of the Great Depression that coincided with all of these laws that had to come out of the investigation from a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, who discovered that the Great Depression was created by Ponzi schemes and all sorts of, by the way, Egberto, the same scenarios that created the 2008 Great Financial Crisis that were involved with derivatives, particularly in inside trading and all sorts of hedges based on smoke and mirrors. Okay, that's the three-card Monty. But the statutes were written by Carter Glass, by the way, that we created this hybrid, what we called government-sponsored enterprise to get us out of the Great Depression. And what that maintained was financing for the infrastructure that would then be followed by the New Deal. That created works projects, that created infrastructure projects, that ultimately financed what led to the biggest military engine in the history of the world. Don't forget that before World War II, we weren't a global superpower militarily. We became that after World War II because of the functions that I'm talking about. But nowhere in those statutes, Egberto, does it say first that, and in fact, it says just the opposite of this in Federal Reserve Act 13.3, that you cannot finance private ownership of real estate through exigent circumstances. That's qualified in the statutes that came from this time period that Congress had to approve because the Federal Reserve is mandated by Congress. That's the idea. Okay. So it's not supposed to be it's supposed to be answerable to Congress, not to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The conversation that's happened since Alan Greenspan is that the Federal Reserve has to maintain independence so that it doesn't get corrupt. So that's the irony here, because what happened was those statutes existed with the advent of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which were the police on the beat to rein in Wall Street's ability to deceive, which created the Great Depression. We learned our lesson. We created laws through Congress to rein it in, and we created the most stable economy in the history of the world for 7 decades until we arrived at the Clinton administration that was made possible by what happened in the Reagan.
Then you got Glass-Steagall, yeah.
They got rid of Glass-Steagall. They got rid of all of the lessons learned from the Great Depression in the concept, the modality of innovation.
But in the process to get out of 2008, they were still able to use 13.3.
But this is what they did, because there was 98 secret meetings between the powers that be, which was Timothy Geithner, who became Secretary of the Treasury, who came out of the New York Federal Reserve Branch, which was the branch that is supposed to regulate Wall Street. Because he didn't regulate Wall Street and he failed miserably, Obama decided to make him head of the Treasury. And he, alongside the former Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, and then, of course, none other than the Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, met behind the scenes with all of the Federal Board of Governors 98 times while they threw the ultimate smoke and mirrors to the history of the world, where they came up with what was known as the Troubled Assets Relief Program to provide the jaw-dropping $750 billion bailout to purchase toxic mortgages that these financial system created based on the liar's loans that we show you.
Which that TARP was just a small percentage of the money actually created.
Everybody in America was like, my God, we're giving Wall Street $750 billion for what? They didn't understand for what, first and foremost. They couldn't even quantify $750 billion. But surprise, it wasn't $750 billion.
It was 71 trillion.
It was 33 trillion at that time. Then there was an additional 16 trillion, and then there was another 22 trillion, and then there's been more since. So it's 71 trillion on the low end. But let me just finish with this, Egberto. Again, they never went to Congress, and they never said, will you change the laws to be able to manifest that we are going to bail out what the DOJ already knew was the largest racketeering enterprise in history. How do I know that, by the way, Egberto? Because the Department of Justice, and you can look it up, and all of the civil decisions that the entirety of the financial system paid $250 billion in fines for the 2008 great financial crisis. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. That's a pretty good cost of doing business, wouldn't you say? So on that note, what I'll say is the entirety of it all was illegal. If you go to thecleannewdeal.org and you look at the white paper, Federal Reserve Act 13.3, you'll see all the parameters and the evidence that not just came from news information and source material and everything that we put into this to be able to prove to the world that the New York Times didn't do, the Washington Post, the LA Times, etc. What we did was we put together, including an interview with the former partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, a gentleman by the name of Raj Cohen. And Sullivan and Cromwell is the white shoe law firm that created the CIA, that just also happened to be the law firm that was dealing with what they called the consortium, which was the too big to fail banks to be able to, behind the scenes legally, in terms of structures and all sorts of smoke and mirrors, manifest, I hate to use that word again because I've used it in all of our interviews, manifest the $33 trillion out of thin air through digits to backstop racketeering, which of course is absurd. Nobody in the history of the world in Congress, if the media was looking at this, would have said, I'm going to vote for corruption.
But you know, the reason why is people have to understand this stuff, and it's not easily understood. Even as you know, it is something that people, the average person, have to understand that they have to do something about it. So, Roseanne, close the Clean New Deal with it, because we are in fact running out of time for this segment.
I'm going to do it fast. Go to Patrick Lovell Presents the Clean New Deal, and you will see we have to recreate a modern day Glass-Steagall Act so that it separates the commercial banking from investment banking. We have to end Citizens United. All it is legalized corruption by dark money. We have to show people that $71 trillion was looted illegally by our financial system. And we got betrayed. Okay, there's tons of different ways that we can spend the public purse on the people, like redoing the entire grid, like having a federal jobs guarantee program, like getting off of fossil fuels, like fixing our prisons, our educational system. The list could go on and on. We also have to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices and enforce a canon of ethics to make those corrupt morons accountable. Put them in jail. We have to end qualified immunity. We have to end presidential immunity. We have to end the Electoral College. That is education. When we educate, when we go on social media and I put the QR code to the Clean New Deal, I want people to take their time and educate themselves. They're not going to watch all of this. They're going to say, oh, I don't have time. Okay, take 5 minutes a day, take 10 minutes a day. And while you're taking your time, share the cleannewdeal.org with everybody you know. Share all the conversations with Egberto and Patrick. Share share. When you share, you feed. That's what I do. I share facts and food. You gotta share first. That's what they have to do. If they don't share, we're dead in the water.
And I'll finish up with this, Egberto, real quick, because I know you got to finish this. Look, power has absolute control, okay? Because of what we've qualified in this entirety of this series, right? Smart people, smart organizations, educated people who write the laws, who get paid by this corruption, that have figured out a way to basically get rid of the people's house, which is Congress, because they've been able to elect a bunch of dimwits who have no idea what's going on anyway. I'll give you a few names: George Santos, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. Are you kidding me? These people shouldn't have a job working in drive-through. That's an insult to people who work in fast food. These people are making laws. Why? Because the system and billionaires revealed that if you get stupid people to become stupid whisperers in the body politic, then you can ultimately deceive them all day, which is the situation that we're in. How is it possible that an idiot by the name of Donald Trump could, one, be accused of being a mastermind of an insurrection? That was never the situation. That guy's just a transactional idiot, and he always has been, and he should have been in prison decades ago. So what we have to do, and what we were trying to do before the election, but we have to penetrate the minds, bodies, and souls of everybody out there who believes in liberty and justice for all and understands that we have to go the distance to redeem the dream. What we have to do is make a show of force. First, you have to share. We got to get millions of people to get on board with all of the elements that Roseanne just set forth, because that is problem solution. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. But we have to show force from this perspective in a peaceful way. We have to do a flash mob in Washington, D.C., where we surround the Supreme Court. We surround the Federal Reserve. We surround Congress. We surround the presidency. We have to have millions of people go on an exodus from corruption to the belly of the beast, which is where our country's power seat is, and demonstrate to the point that everybody in the country is going to get wind of what we've just revealed. And the way we're going to do that is, once we do the flash mob, we get the we get the attention, we get everybody talking about it. Then we exodus to the National Mall, where we're under the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A nation of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth." And Martin Luther King said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Well, we will reveal this to the American people, soup to nuts, and from that point forward, America cannot be played again.
Patrick Lovell, the producer of The Con, where he discussed the fraudulent mortgage racketeering schemes, have some answers. And Rose Ann Ravioli Miele, thank you so kindly for this. I want to call this series, I'd like to find a better name later on, of how the billionaire class got away with power accumulation over the last 14 years, because it is so much more. Thank you so kindly for spending this time. I think this is going to be very revealing for a lot of our listeners. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
Happy New Year, brother.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We all know that the Democratic Party is getting a pretty bad rep right now. In fact, a lot of people are in states, the 30 states that actually register people by party. The Democrats have lost about 2-point-something million registrations, while the Republicans have gained about 2-point-something million registrations. That's a net of over 4 million shift towards the Republicans, if you want to kind of look at it that way. But the reality is that's not the real answer. The real answer is a lot of the people that are leaving the Democratic Party are people that are just upset that the party continues to lean more towards the neoliberal side, the establishment side. But the establishment is one thing. People are the next. And if you take a look at what happened in New York with Mamdani, what it proves is that Zoran is absolutely it's a template that we ought to be looking at. He touches all the buttons that all parties, all the people in all parties are looking for. It doesn't matter that the billionaire class are going to try to hit him on being a democratic socialist. That doesn't matter. Because what democratic socialism means to America is exactly what they're asking for. Take the names off, take the labels off. The policies that this guy is putting out there, when he articulates them, because he's a very good communicator, that is what the people want. It is a shame that Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, the two leaders of the party, are refusing to wholeheartedly endorse this guy. In fact, they're looking pretty silly. They are not the future of the Democratic Party. The future of the Democratic Party lies with progressives. Punto y final. I want you to listen to this little piece here, and then we'll take it on the other side. It's a very short piece.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been saying, including the New York Magazine, by the way, they had this headline that said the obituaries for the Democratic Party are premature. What is your take on all this?
I think the Democratic Party has a lot of work in front of it. I think the reason a lot of these voters shifted over is for opportunity. I think part of this is Trump is an avatar for them. He stands up for them. The other part of it is that they see the Republicans more generally, and Trump specifically, as a successful businessman who's going to create economic opportunities that allow them to put money on the table for their families. That flies in the face of decades of statistics that show the GDP and the economy has performed better under Democrats, that our economy does better when we embrace diversity, when we embrace inclusion. I think it's also better morally and socially, but you don't have to make that argument on those grounds to people who are put off by that. You can simply say the Democrats have a strong track record of creating opportunities and optimism for people who need it, and get that message out of the hands of the Republicans. I also think that's an animating force in all of this.
So let's be very clear here. There is a Democratic Party, and what the Democratic Party means to the working class, what it means to the middle class. And then there's a Republican Party that survives online, that survives on promising something and delivering everything else delivering all to the wealthy class. That is the choice that we have. All the progressive parties are under the wing of the Democratic Party, like it or not. I mean, that's just in a duopoly. There's not much that is the answer in a duopoly, until within that duopoly we do the necessary steps to change it progressively. So therefore, the demise of the party, premature, yes. How do we move forward? Well, New York, I think, has shown how to move forward. Disregard the billionaires, disregard the establishment, and pick the person who speaks to not only to your heart, but speaks to your financial well-being. And then disregard. Answer vociferously those who try to trip you up, like they've been trying to trip up Mamdani for the longest time. But when you have somebody who can communicate the good that progressives represent against the lies and the evil of the right and the establishment, against the policies that move things simply to one direction, that's a winning combination every progressive can learn from. And I just watched Mamdani on yet another interview on CNBC. And let me tell you something. If there is one person who knows to communicate the message, it is this guy. And if other Democrats out there, other progressives out there, if they want a template on how to speak on just about every issue, including issues that are anathema to their beliefs, follow that template, because this guy has what it takes.
All of our country's problems, from polarization to ignorance on domestic and international issues to a complete misunderstanding of our economic and healthcare systems, are a direct result of a derelict mainstream media that too often bend over backwards to support corporate or bought politicians' wants, as opposed to the people's needs for real information to make their lives better. Independent media is the only solution to inform truthfully and factually. Why? Because our loyalties are to you, the ones who fund us with small dollar contributions and subscriptions. Please consider supporting our independent media platforms by subscribing to our Egberto Off the Record newsletter at politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Again, that is politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's an investment that pays incalculable dividends.